The latest round of race riots and the state of emergency in Kenosha, Wisconsin are proof that the Democrats know they have lost the 2020 election. In this video, we're going to take a look at the latest riots that have blown up due to a police shooting. We're going to explore the cultural Marxist narrative that's inflamed these riots and how this latest round of riots is actually an admission that the Democrats believe they've already lost 2020. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you as always. If this is your first time here at this channel, I post 2 videos a day analyzing current events, as some super awesome conservative trends so that you can live in the present light of even better things to come. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. It'd be an absolute privilege to have you as a regular part of this channel as we together celebrate each and every day the collapse of left-wing globalism and the unstoppable rise of a new conservative age. But first, before we do anything else, make sure to click on that link below and head on over to my special website for my Patriot Food Supply. As we saw with the whole pandemic insanity, we cannot wait for an emergency to happen before we respond to one. And no one makes preparing for an emergency more ridiculously easy and affordable than my Patriot Supply. Gang, they're simply the best. Their food kits last up to 25 years in storage. They include breakfast, lunches, and dinners. And best of all, they got a guarantee policy that'll absolutely knock your socks off. And if you act now, you could save $100 off a full 4-week emergency food supply when you click on the link below to my special website. You heard that right, $100 off. So do not wait. I've got my food supply. Make sure you get yours. Click on that link below. Or go to preparewithsteve.com. Save $100 off your very own 4-week emergency food supply today. All right, gang, let's dive right in. Riots have once again broken out and a state of emergency has been declared in our nation. This is now in the city of Kenosha, in Wisconsin. A police officer involved shooting of a black man on Sunday sparked the destructive unrest. While we're still gathering data on what actually happened as of the making of this video, according to local reports, police were called to a domestic incident in the 2800 block of 40th Street at around 5 o'clock p.m. Kenosha News reported that neighbors said that a black man by the name of Jacob Blake was trying to break up a fight between 2 women. At some point during the police intervention, things turned violent with the police officers and Blake, which eventually resulted in Blake getting shot in the back by the police officers. He is currently in critical condition in a city hospital, and the officers have been put on administrative leave pending an investigation of the shooting. But unfortunately, and true to cue, given the current frenzy that has taken over the imaginations, so many of our urban centers, no such investigation is needed. As far as they're concerned, police officers shooting a black man was all that was needed in order to burn the city down. Armed rioters were reported to have shut down streets in the city, preventing police officers from entering, which resulted in police throwing tear gas canisters from the top of their vehicles to disperse the crowd. There were reports of gunshots ringing out from the side of the rioters. Once again, businesses have been looted and ravaged as a result of these riots. Windows have been smashed. And yet, when the feckless left-wing Democrat governor of Wisconsin decided to spew out his official statement regarding this situation, did he excoriate those who would destroy those businesses and livelihoods of law-abiding citizens? No. Like every other Democrat politician, he threw the police under the bus. Listen to this nauseating nonsense spewed out from this leftist loon. Quote, "Tonight, Jacob Blake was shot in the back multiple times in broad daylight in Kenosha, Wisconsin. While we do not have all the details yet, what we know for certain is that he is not the first black man or person to have been shot or injured or mercilessly killed at the hands of individuals in law enforcement in our state or our country." Disgusting. I've said all along that although we must offer our empathy, equally important is our action. In the coming days, we will demand just that of elected officials in our state who have failed to recognize the racism in our state and our country for far too long. I mean, just utterly disgusting pandering on the part of this feckless Democrat. Absolutely. Now, look, I think we need to realize what's really going on here. Okay, there are 2 things I see coming out of all of this. First and foremost, I think what this governor is spewing here is an admission. It's an admission that the Democrats are realizing that they lost the 2020 election. Okay? November is over. Joe Biden had his convention, and the only bump in the polls were for Trump. Trump had one of the best weeks of his presidency with surging approval ratings, and the Democrats experienced an absolute disaster. And so this is why I think the Kenosha riots and the response by this feckless leftist governor are proof positive that the Democrats recognize they have lost this November election. They really believe that Biden was going to win. The Democrats are guaranteed to just waltz right into power, back into power in November. Then the Democratic leadership would not feel the need to have to do everything they can to try to rise up their black constituent voters. It's already guaranteed. They don't have to worry about it. We're winning. Don't mess it up, right? Don't blow it. We don't have anything. We don't have to do anything. Old Joe is in his basement. Trump is doing everything we need him to do to sink his re-election chances. We don't need to do anything. So be quiet, everyone. Don't freak out yet, and we will make it to victory, I promise. That's not what's happening. The Democrats are doubling down and doing everything they possibly can to stoke racial animosity and division and fission, which tells me that they expect Trump to be hanging out in the White House for the next several years. This isn't confidence. It's chaos. Manufactured chaos is not confidence. This is an admission that they have lost. So they're just burning it down. They're burning it all down. If Trump is going to be around for the next several years, just burn as much of it down as possible, right? We'll burn it in terms of our city, and feckless Democratic politicians will burn the system down in terms of disparaging and degrading our nation and its law enforcement, our police, who are wonderful. And one of the primary means by which these feckless Democrat politicians are trying to burn things down with is actually through pushing a narrative. And we see this narrative in the governor's nauseating official comments on the shootings. We have to understand that his words actually serve to stoke intentionally more protests. And that's because his words push a narrative that provokes violence. You know, cultural anthropologists have studied what we actually call an ethnography of violence, why groups end up deferring to acts of aggression and destruction, what's behind that. How do you get mass groups of people to collectively come together and participate in acts of demolition and devastation? And what's so interesting here is that narrative. The whole element of story is central to an ethnography of violence. An overarching narrative, a social story, is what provides the means by which groups are organized or at least brought together in a kind of solidarity that surges into expressions of violence. And what we have to understand is that the myth or meta story that's defined urban populations in the United States over the last several decades is what scholars call emancipatory politics. It's more commonly known as cultural Marxism, but the technical term is emancipatory politics. Emancipatory politics re-envisions the public square as a place of political emancipation, where the modern liberal state is tasked with liberating individuals and groups from traditional social structures and arrangements that are now deemed racist and bigoted and a major impediment against their social advancement. And what we have to understand is that within such emancipatory politics, we saw emerging a new racial logic, particularly in the 1960s. And this new racial logic reimagined culture as a binary of antithetical power distributions between a dominant colonialist power, often labeled white, that deliberately or unconsciously disenfranchises politically and socially minority cultures through, racist and sexist exclusions. Again, this is what we tend to think of in terms of cultural Marxism. Society is comprised of power discrepancies where a power-filled majority impose these permanent power discrepancies on racial and ethnic minorities. So that's what we have in our inner cities. That's why so many blacks are incarcerated, on and on. It's because society is in some way purposely keeping ethnic minorities from socially advancing through systemically racist policies. That's the narrative that's going on here. And so this narrative, this meta story, fostered a new conception of racism. which was specific to systems of power and domination. And this new conception of racism is often referred to as the prejudice plus power paradigm of racism. And it basically says that only those who have political power can be racist. Racism is not a term that extends to minority populations. They cannot possibly be racist. This was well represented by a manual compiled by affirmative action officer Carolyn Pitts in the 1980s. Check this out, and I'm quoting her directly so you get a real sense of the new vision of racism that's permeated our inner cities and our urban areas, not to mention our cultural Marxist-infested universities. Quote, in the United States at present, only whites can be racist, since whites dominate and control the institutions that create and enforce American cultural norms and values. Blacks and other third world peoples do not have access to the power to enforce any prejudices they may have, so they cannot, by definition, be racist. And she goes on to say, all white individuals in our society are racist, even those free from conscious prejudice, because they receive benefits distributed by a white racist society through its institutions. Our institutional and cultural processes are so arranged as to automatically benefit whites just because they are white, close quote. Now, the reason why all this is important is that it's precisely this racial logic that's engendered the notion that white police officers, as enforcers of the systemic domination, are engaged in a racist war against black civilians. So from this vantage point, what happened originally to George Floyd, or in this case with the latest in Kenosha, the Kenosha shooting, by definition, they can't be isolated incidents. They all reveal the painful truth about an epidemic of police on black crime that is itself evidential of the larger systemic racism that's purposely oppressing minority races. So that's why we're seeing this kind of explosion in race riots, and that's why we'll continue to see it, right? The power of that story to explain racial minorities' adverse circumstances couldn't be, it just simply could not be exaggerated. Now, the fact that it's not true seems to have absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever. Only about 12% or whites are 3 times more likely to be shot and killed at the hands of police officers than blacks. 12% of white homicides are at the hands of police officers. 4% are blacks. In other words, fatal police shootings are disproportionately directed towards whites than they are towards blacks. In fact, the vast majority of blacks are killed, the homicide victims are killed by fellow black assailants. But that doesn't seem to matter when it comes to a narrative that actually empowers Democrat politicians. And when all is said and done, the fact that they have deferred to that narrative in light of the shooting seems to tell me, at least, that they believe they truly have lost in November. Now, before you go, you'll definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on the Proud Boys crushing a bunch of Antifa soy boys in Portland as law enforcement has begun to side with the rising up of patriots all across the country. You're going to absolutely love it. So make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.